Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going deep into the fascinating world of human learning and memory.
Oh yeah, this is gonna be good.
We're diving into some really intriguing excerpts from Human Learning and Memory by David A. Lieberman.
Great book.
Get ready to understand how your own mind learns, remembers, and maybe even forgets.
It's a wild ride.
So right off the bat, Lieberman throws us this curveball with neural determinism. It's basically like, what if our brains are wired in a way that just dictates our behavior?
It's a big question, huge implications, Like if you really boil it down, if it's all just our brain structure, those little electrical signals between neurons, do we really have free will?
Whoa.
Or are we just like playing out some predetermined script?
It's kind of freeing and terrifying at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Like imagine if every choice you make is already mapped out by how your brain is wired.
Absolutely. And Lieberman doesn't shy away from it at all. He lays out this really compelling case for how our physical brain influences what we do.
Right.
But he also says, it's not that simple.
Okay.
There's still room for free will for us to shape our own destinies.
So we've got the incredible hardware, our brain, but maybe there's some intangible software running too. This consciousness.
Exactly. And that leads to another point he makes, the limits of introspection. Can we really get our own minds just by, thinking really hard?
I mean, isn't that what we do all the time?
Yeah.
Analyzing our thoughts and feelings, trying to figure out why we do the things we do.
We do, but we might not be as good at it as we think. Lieberman's actually pretty skeptical about the power of introspection. He mentions this guy, Wilhelm Wundt, a pioneer in psychology who tried to study the mind.
How do you do that?
By having people describe their own thoughts and feelings in response to different things.
So like showing them a picture and asking, what's going on in your mind right now?
Exactly. But Wundt found it was super unreliable.
Yeah.
People just couldn't put those inner experiences into words consistently or objectively, I guess.
I can see that. It's like trying to describe a feeling to someone. Words don't really do it justice.
Right.
We've all had those moments where you just can't explain why you feel a certain way or why you made a decision.
And we end up making up explanations after the fact, trying to make our behavior seem rational,
I've been there. So if we can't always trust our own introspection, how do scientists study something as complex as the human mind? How do you cut through all the noise and figure out how we learn?
And that is where the beauty of scientific experimentation comes in.
Okay, so actual experiments. But how do you experiment on something like thoughts? You can't dissect a thought.
Yeah, it's not exactly dissecting a frog in biology class.
Right.
But scientists have come up with some really clever ways to study learning. Lieberman talks about this amazing case study with Washoe.
Who's Washoe?
Washoe was a chimpanzee who learned American Sign Language.
Whoa, a chimp that learned sign language. That's incredible.
It is pretty incredible. And this wasn't just some, party trick. Researchers tracked Washoe's progress so carefully, documenting everything, her vocabulary, how she could put signs together into phrases, even her grasp of grammar.
So they were learning about how this chimp learned language just by observing her.
Exactly. And these kinds of studies can teach us a lot about our own capacity for learning. Lieberman also spends a lot of time in this book breaking down the connection between learning and memory, which is something we take for granted. But it's remarkable how our brains store and retrieve information.
Yeah, it's so weird. I mean, I can remember song lyrics from when I was a kid, but I forget where I put my keys 5 minutes ago.
Right. And we often think of learning and memory as two sides of the same coin, but Lieberman actually makes this subtle distinction between the two.
Okay, how so?
Think of learning as acquiring a new skill, and memory is being able to recall that skill later on.
So learning is like the getting and memory is the keeping.
You got it.
But how can you have one without the other?
You can't. They're completely inseparable. Every time you learn something new, your brain's making a memory of it at the same time.
That's so cool.
It is cool, but some of those memories are really fleeting, short-term memory especially.
Oh man, don't even get me started on short-term memory. Mine's got the attention span of a goldfish.
Well, Lieberman talks about this classic experiment that shows just how fragile short-term memory can be. It's called the Brown-Peterson procedure.
Brown-Peterson. Sounds kind of ominous.
It's really not that complicated. Imagine you're given 3 random letters to remember, like a GJK.
Okay, GJK. Got it.
Now someone asks you to count backward from 100 by threes, to stop you from repeating the letters in your head. Even after a short delay, people really struggle to remember them.
Wow, really? So a small distraction can just wipe out a recent memory like that. I guess that explains why I walk into rooms and forget why I'm there.
Exactly. Without actively rehearsing it, that information just fades away. So how do we form lasting memories then? How does information make that jump from short-term to long-term memory?
Yeah, it's like, how does our brain decide what to hold on to?
That's where schemas come in.
Schemas, what are those?
They're kind of like mental frameworks. Think of them like folders on your computer that help make sense of the world. Instead of remembering every little detail, our brains use these schemas to categorize information, find patterns.
So our brains use these schemas to file information away in a way that makes sense.
Right. And the more we can link new information to existing schemas, the more likely we are to remember it. Like building a structure, the more connections you have, the stronger it is.
Okay, that makes sense, but what's a real-world example of this?
So Lieberman talks about this experiment where people were asked to wait in an office for a bit. Later, they had to recall what they saw.
Okay.
And people misremembered items based on what they expected to see in a typical office.
So if they expected a stapler, they might remember seeing one, even if it wasn't actually there.
Exactly. It shows how our schemas, our pre-existing ideas, actually influence how we remember things.
So it was like our brains are telling themselves these stories based on our expectations, filling in the blanks.
Yeah, exactly.
But what's the practical use of all this?
Yeah.
How does knowing about schemas help us in real life?
Well, Lieberman doesn't just leave us hanging with these theories. He actually gives us some really practical advice on how to use this stuff to, like, improve our lives.
Okay, so like life hacks for our brains. I like it.
Right. He talks about this thing called spaced repetition.
Spaced repetition.
Basically, we remember things better if we space out our study sessions over time instead of cramming.
That makes sense. Give your brain time to actually absorb the information.
Exactly. Cramming might work for a test, but if you really want to remember something...
Spaced repetition is the way to go.
Exactly.
So like, instead of pulling an all-nighter, study a little bit each day.
Much better for your brain. And he also talks about motivation and rewards.
Well, yeah, we're more likely to learn something if we actually enjoy it, right?
Totally. Our brains are wired to seek out pleasure, avoid pain. So if we can make learning fun, more rewarding...
We'll learn more effectively. Find what you're passionate about, and learning becomes an adventure. This has been a fascinating deep dive. We've covered so much.
Yeah.
But I got to ask, Lieberman explains how we learn, but he doesn't really get to why.
That is the big question, isn't it?
Why do we even have these amazing brains that can learn, remember, forget?
It's a question that keeps scientists and philosophers up at night. Why did evolution give us these brains?
I mean, it makes you think. Memory isn't just about remembering facts for a test. It's about survival, learning from our experiences.
Absolutely. Adapting, passing that knowledge on.
It connects us to our past, helps us navigate the present. Wow.
It lets us imagine the future.
Well said. Well, that's our deep dive into human learning and memory. We've covered so much ground, but hopefully you've learned a thing or two about how your own mind works. That's pretty amazing stuff. And if you want to learn even more, definitely check out Human Learning and Memory by David A. Lieberman.
It'll really make you think.
It's a fascinating read. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.